Broad daylight. A quiet apartment parking lot in Parkville, Baltimore County. A young woman bursts into the open, sprinting across the pavement. Her voice cracks with fear. She's shouting one desperate sentence over and over. "I have a restraining order against you." Behind her, a man walks calmly, almost casually, holding a gun in his hand. Every step he takes closes the gap between them. From the windows above, neighbors scream. "Stop," one yells. Another warns, "We're recording this." The voices are urgent but powerless. She doesn't slow down. She keeps running. He keeps coming. 3 sharp cracks split the afternoon air. She falls to the ground. And he doesn't run. He turns, walks away like it was any other day, leaving chaos behind. The victim was Shakia Allen, 27 years old, a mother, a woman trying to move forward with her life. What ended in that parking lot had been building for months. Months of escalating tension. A relationship that began with shared smiles and social media posts, but turned controlling, volatile, and ultimately deadly. There was already a history of complaints. A protective order. A pending assault charge. The system was involved. And yet it wasn't enough to stop him. Welcome to Dark Trace Crime Stories. In this episode, we'll follow the full timeline. The toxic relationship that spiraled into violence. The legal battles that offered little protection. The disturbing cell phone video that captured Shakia's final moments. And the warning signs that were ignored long before the gunshots. But first, I want to know where you're watching from. And tell me, do protective orders really keep victims safe, or do they sometimes arrive too late, when it's already too late to act?
I have a restraining order on you.
This viral video captures the final moments of 27-year-old Shakia Allen's life on the internet, sparking the hashtag Justice for Shakia.
That's what she was on.
Hey, get the off her, you asshole. Leave her alone. I'm calling the cops. Oh my God!
911 begins receiving several calls.
They're advising that a female has been shot. One Whitelaw Place, one Whitelaw Place. Victim is a black female, 20 years of age. Another caller called in and said that they saw a black male, dark do-rag, and a black shirt shoot the woman.
It's the suspect still on scene.
Sounds like the male party ran. He's got the gun in his hand.
Shakia Allen was known first as a young woman trying to build a life for herself and her child. She was 27 years old and lived in Baltimore County, Maryland, spending much of her time in the Parkville and Pikesville areas. Like many people her age, Shakia used social media to document everyday moments. On TikTok, she occasionally posted short clips of outings, meals, and casual moments with people close to her. The videos were simple, nothing dramatic. Just snapshots of a young woman living her day-to-day life. In one video that would later circulate after her death, Shakia appeared relaxed and smiling while sitting at a restaurant table. Across from her was the man who would later become the central figure in the investigation. At the time, it looked like an ordinary moment. There was no sign of the conflict that would eventually define the end of her story. But beyond the social media posts and brief glimpses into her daily life, Shakia had another role that mattered far more. She was a mother. Shakia had a daughter, someone who depended on her and who represented the future she was working toward. Friends have often said that parenthood changes the way someone thinks about life. Decisions become less about the present and more about stability, safety, and the kind of environment a child will grow up in. For Shakia, that likely meant trying to move forward when situations around her became difficult. Because by early 2024, parts of her personal life had already become complicated. The relationship that once appeared normal, at least from the outside, had started to show serious cracks. Arguments had been reported. Police had been called to address disputes. And at one point, both Shakia and the man she had been involved with filed domestic violence complaints against each other. Temporary protective orders were issued, signaling that the conflict between them had reached a level where legal intervention was necessary. But like many cases involving strained relationships, things did not end cleanly. Court hearings were scheduled, yet neither party attended one of the early proceedings. Without their presence, the case was dismissed, leaving the underlying tension unresolved. From the outside, life seemed to continue as usual. Shakia still posted on social media. She still spent time with friends. She still focused on her responsibilities as a mother. But beneath that normal routine, the relationship that had once been part of her life was becoming increasingly unstable. And within months, the situation would escalate far beyond arguments and court paperwork. Because the man at the center of those earlier disputes, Amir Johnson, was not finished with her life. In fact, the most serious confrontation between them was still ahead. And it would set the stage for the events that ultimately ended in a parking lot shooting that shocked residents across Baltimore County, Maryland. To understand how that happened, we have to look closely at the turning point in their relationship. The moment when the conflict moved from heated arguments to something far more dangerous. By the time the public learned the name Amir Johnson, the relationship between him and Shakia Allen had already gone through a long and difficult breakdown. Johnson was Shakia's former boyfriend. For a period of time, they were involved in a relationship that, at least from the outside, appeared ordinary. There were moments where nothing seemed out of place. One example that later resurfaced online was a short video posted on TikTok months before the violence reached its peak. In that clip, Shakia and Johnson were sitting across from each other at a restaurant table. They appeared relaxed, sharing a casual moment over a meal. To anyone watching that video at the time, it looked like a typical couple spending time together. There was no sign of what would later unfold. But relationships that eventually turn violent rarely begin that way. The shift often happens gradually, with conflict building over time until it reaches a point where law enforcement becomes involved. For Shakia and Johnson, that turning point began in the summer of 2023. In August 2023, domestic violence complaints were filed by both parties. Each accused the other of abusive behavior, and the situation escalated to the point where temporary protective orders were issued. Protective orders are meant to create distance between two people when a conflict becomes dangerous. They can place restrictions on contact and provide a legal path for intervention if those restrictions are violated. In this case, the legal system had already taken the first step, but the process required both individuals to appear in court. When the hearing date arrived, neither Shakia nor Johnson showed up. Because of that absence, the case was dismissed. What could have been a formal review of the situation ended without a resolution. No long-term protective order was established, and the conflict between them continued outside the courtroom. Moments like this are often overlooked when people later examine cases involving violence between partners. A hearing that never happens, a dispute that remains unsettled, and two people who continue living their lives while unresolved tensions remain. For a time, that appears to be what happened here. But by early 2024, the conflict had not gone away. In fact, it was becoming more serious. The next major incident took place in February 2024, and it marked a dramatic escalation in the relationship between Shakia Allen and Amir Johnson. By that point, the two were connected through a shared residence on Bayberry Road in Baltimore County, Maryland. According to police reports, an argument between them stretched across multiple days. The situation became so tense that officers were called to the residence several times. During this period, Shakia was attempting to move out of the home. Leaving a shared living situation during a volatile relationship can be one of the most dangerous moments in cases involving domestic conflict. It represents a clear break, and sometimes that shift triggers further aggression. Police responses to the Bayberry Road address reflected just how serious things had become. Officers were dispatched repeatedly as disputes continued. Eventually, the situation escalated to the point where an arrest was made. Amir Johnson was taken into custody and charged with assault. During that same incident, officers discovered that Johnson was carrying a handgun that had been legally registered. As part of their response, the weapon was removed by police for safekeeping. That detail would later become one of the most discussed aspects of the case. Because even after the assault charge and the confiscation of the firearm, the situation between Johnson and Shakia Allen was not completely resolved. The assault case continued through the court system, and a trial date was scheduled. Johnson was expected to appear in court on April 29, 2024, to face the charge connected to the February incident. At that moment, the legal process was moving forward. But time was running out for Shakia. 8 days before that scheduled court appearance, the conflict that had been building for months would reach its most violent conclusion. On April 21, 2024, in the middle of the afternoon, Shakia Allen found herself running through a parking lot in Parkville, Maryland, shouting that she had a restraining order. People nearby could hear her cries for help. Witnesses would later say the situation unfolded quickly. A man followed behind her with a gun. Within seconds, the argument that had once taken place inside homes and court paperwork would explode into gunfire in front of an entire neighborhood. The violence that had been developing over months was about to reach its final moment. And this time, there would be no argument to settle later. No hearing scheduled weeks away. Only a confrontation that would end with Shakia Allen lying on the pavement while the man accused of shooting her walked away. What happened in that parking lot would soon be captured on a cell phone recording that spread across the internet. And for many people who watched it, one question stood out immediately. How did a conflict that had already drawn police attention and court action end with a woman running for her life in broad daylight? To answer that, we have to examine the exact timeline of what happened on the afternoon of April 21st.
Get away from me!
You ain't gonna do nothing but get yourself in trouble, bro.
I have a restraining order on you.
Call the police. That's my police.
That's why she recording.
Hey! Get the fuck off her, you asshole! Leave her the fuck alone, I'm calling the cops! Come here, girl! Come here! Don't you fucking hurt her! Hey! Leave her alone! Oh! Oh my God! Oh! He fucking shot her!
Call the cops.
Oh my God, should I call him?
I'm calling him.
Hurry up!
The final moments of Shakia Allen's life unfolded on the afternoon of April 21st, 2024. It was a Sunday. Around 3 p.m., the apartment complex on Whitelaw Place in Parkville, Maryland looked like any other quiet residential area in Baltimore County, Maryland. Cars were parked in neat rows along the lot. Some residents were inside their apartments, while others moved in and out of the buildings as part of their usual routine. Nothing about that afternoon suggested that, within minutes, the parking lot would become the scene of a killing witnessed by multiple people. But shortly after 3 p.m., something changed. Voices began rising outside. At first, it sounded like an argument. Then the shouting became louder. A young woman suddenly appeared running across the parking lot. It was Shakia Allen. She was moving quickly, clearly trying to create distance between herself and the man behind her. That man was Amir Johnson. According to witnesses and the recording taken by a nearby resident, Johnson was walking in the same direction Allen was running. In his hand was a handgun. As Allen ran, she began shouting words that several people nearby would later remember clearly. "I have a restraining order against you." She repeated it again. "I have a restraining order against you." The statement suggested that she believed the legal order should stop him from coming any closer. But the distance between them continued to shrink. From windows and balconies overlooking the parking lot, residents began yelling. Some shouted warnings. Others told Johnson to stop. One voice could be heard shouting that he had a gun. The situation was unfolding in full view of multiple witnesses. At least one resident had already started recording on a cell phone. The video shows Allen moving quickly across the lot, clearly trying to get away. Johnson follows behind her. The weapon is visible. People watching from nearby apartments can be heard reacting in real time. Some voices sound panicked. Others are trying to warn Allen. But the confrontation moves too quickly. Within seconds, the moment that people feared becomes unavoidable. Gunshots ring out across the parking lot. 3 sharp shots break the tension that had filled the air only moments earlier. Allen collapses onto the pavement. Her body falls near the parked vehicles that line the lot. The voices from nearby apartments suddenly shift from warnings to shock. The cell phone recording continues for several seconds after the shots. What happens next would later stand out to many people who watched the footage. Instead of running, the man who fired the gun simply turns and begins walking away. He does not appear rushed. He does not appear to be hiding. He walks away from the area while residents continue shouting from their windows. Within moments, the reality of what just happened begins to spread through the apartment complex. Someone has been shot, and several people have just witnessed it. One of those residents was Jessica Hayostek, who lived nearby. When the gunshots first rang out, she did not immediately recognize them as gunfire. Later, she explained that the sound initially reminded her of fireworks. But the noise outside her apartment prompted her to look out. When she stepped toward the window and looked outside, she saw a man walking away from the area. Moments later, the situation became clear. Someone had been shot in the parking lot. At roughly the same time, multiple residents were already calling emergency services. 911 operators began receiving reports describing what had just happened. Callers reported that a woman had been shot. Some described the man who had been seen holding the gun. Others explained that the incident had been captured on a phone recording. The urgency of those calls prompted a rapid response from law enforcement and emergency personnel. Officers from the Baltimore County Police Department were dispatched to the Whitelaw Place apartment complex. When they arrived, they found Shakia Allen lying in the parking lot with multiple gunshot wounds. Emergency responders attempted to assess her condition, but the injuries were severe. Despite the rapid response, Allen was pronounced dead at the scene. She was only 27 years old. The same woman who had been running across that parking lot moments earlier was now gone, and the man believed to be responsible had already left the area. The investigation that followed moved quickly. One reason was the number of witnesses who had seen the shooting, but another key factor was the recording captured by a nearby resident. The video showed much of the confrontation that had just taken place. It showed Allen running. It showed the man following her with a gun, and it captured the moment the shots were fired. Because of that evidence, investigators were able to move quickly to identify the person seen in the recording. The suspect was Amir Johnson. By that point, Johnson was already known to Allen through their past relationship and the earlier incidents that had drawn police attention. Within hours, investigators began focusing their efforts on locating him. Authorities issued a warrant for Johnson's arrest in connection with the shooting. The case quickly became a top priority for detectives. At the same time, information about the suspect was released to the public. Law enforcement asked anyone who might know Johnson's location to come forward. The message was clear. He needed to be found. As news of the killing spread through the community and across social media, the cell phone recording taken by the neighbor began circulating online. For many people who watched the footage, the moment was deeply disturbing. A woman running for her life, shouting that she had a restraining order, and a man following her with a gun in broad daylight. In response, Metro Crime Stoppers announced a reward for information that could lead to Johnson's arrest. The goal was to encourage anyone with knowledge about his whereabouts to contact authorities. Meanwhile, investigators continued gathering evidence connected to the shooting. Witness statements were collected. The video recording became a key piece of the case, and detectives worked to trace Johnson's movements after he left the apartment complex. But as the investigation unfolded, many people watching the case began asking difficult questions. Questions that often arise in cases involving violence between former partners. Because months before the shooting, police had already been called to disputes between Johnson and Allen. An assault charge had already been filed earlier in 2024, and a court appearance connected to that case had already been scheduled. Yet despite all of that, the situation still ended with a woman running across a parking lot while trying to escape someone she had already accused of harming her. For many people following the case, that detail raised a larger conversation. A conversation about how these situations are handled, and whether more could have been done before things reached that final moment. And this is where I want to pause for a moment and hear from you. Because stories like this raise difficult questions that communities across the country continue to face. Should someone accused of domestic violence be allowed to keep access to firearms while a case is still pending? And when a restraining order is issued, does it actually provide the protection people expect it to? I want you to share your thoughts in the comments. And while you're there, tell me what city or country you're watching from today. Because cases like the murder of Shakia Allen are not isolated incidents. They raise issues that affect communities everywhere. And in the next part of this story, we'll look at what happened after the shooting, the manhunt that followed, and the new developments that would soon connect this case to another investigation hundreds of miles away.
You knew us, you smiled with us, you've laughed with us, so how could you find it in your heart to chase her down and just shoot her in broad daylight?
The Scotts of Baltimore, Maryland were a close family, and single mom Shakia was at the heart of it.
She was a good girl, very fun, always smiling, always had jokes.
I remember I loved going everywhere with her. I remember when she got her first apartment, I always wanted to be over there.
She would send me stuff on TikTok about when people talk about they don't have their fathers in their life. And she'd be like, well, I can't speak for none of y'all because my father always been in my life.
And when Shakia introduced her father and sister to a new boyfriend, Amir Johnson, they initially thought he fit right in.
In the hours following the shooting, investigators began working quickly to track down the man accused of killing Shakia Allen. By the evening of April 21st, authorities had already identified the suspect as Amir Johnson, the same man who had previously been involved in domestic violence complaints with Allen. Detectives from the Baltimore County Police Department began coordinating a search effort, focusing on locations Johnson was known to frequent and reaching out to individuals who might have information about where he had gone after leaving the apartment complex in Parkville, Maryland. A warrant for his arrest was issued, formally charging him in connection with Allen's killing. But Johnson was nowhere to be found. As investigators searched for him, the case quickly gained widespread attention beyond Baltimore County, Maryland. One reason was the disturbing cell phone recording that had captured the confrontation in the parking lot. The video spread rapidly across social media platforms, where thousands of people watched the final moments leading up to the gunshots. For many viewers, the most haunting part of the recording was Allen's voice. She could be heard shouting that she had a restraining order. Those words echoed across the internet as the footage circulated. Soon, the case began drawing public reaction. Friends, relatives, and people who had never met Shakia started sharing her story online. Messages calling for accountability appeared across different platforms, and the phrase #JusticeForShakia began appearing in posts and comment sections. As the hashtag spread, so did awareness of the case. People shared Allen's name, her photos, and details about what had happened in the parking lot that afternoon. The attention also brought renewed focus to the search for Amir Johnson. Investigators urged the public to contact authorities if they had any information about his location. To encourage tips, Metro Crime Stoppers announced a reward for information that could lead to Johnson's arrest. Despite those efforts, the days following the shooting passed without an immediate arrest. Johnson remained at large. Law enforcement agencies continued to pursue leads while warning the public that he should be considered dangerous. As the search continued, new information began emerging that expanded the scope of the investigation. Reports surfaced indicating that Johnson was being looked at in connection with another homicide investigation in a different state. That investigation was taking place in Conyers, Georgia. The victim in that case was Caleb King. Authorities in Georgia had been investigating King's death, and Johnson's name eventually appeared as part of that inquiry. Law enforcement officials indicated that they were examining possible links between Johnson and the Georgia case. Details about that investigation remained limited at the time, and officials were careful about what information they released publicly. What was confirmed, however, was that Johnson had become a person of interest connected to the homicide investigation involving Caleb King. For investigators in Maryland, the immediate focus remained the killing of Shakia Allen. But the information emerging from Georgia added another layer to the manhunt. Now, the suspect in Allen's death was potentially connected to violence in another state as well. As days passed and Johnson remained unaccounted for, the urgency surrounding the search increased. Authorities continued sharing updates with the public, asking anyone who might have seen him or knew where he was hiding to come forward. At the same time, the case continued to gain attention online and through news coverage. People following the story were struck by the sequence of events that had led to Allen's death. Months earlier, police had already responded to disputes between the couple. An assault charge had been filed earlier in 2024. A court date connected to that case had already been scheduled. And yet the situation still ended with Allen being shot in broad daylight. The investigation now had two clear objectives. First, locate and arrest Amir Johnson. Second, prepare the evidence needed to bring the case through the justice system. But even as authorities continued the search, the story of Shakia Allen was already leaving a lasting impact. Her death had sparked conversations about the risks people face when trying to leave volatile relationships and the challenges involved in preventing violence before it reaches a tragic end. And that raises one final question that we need to talk about. What can be learned from cases like this? Because while the legal process focuses on holding offenders accountable, Stories like Shakia Allen's also reveal the warning signs that appear long before a crime takes place. In the end, Shakia Allen was more than a headline or a viral video. She was a 27-year-old mother, a woman who tried to live her life on her own terms, who sought independence and safety for herself and her daughter. She had dreams, connections, and moments of joy she shared with her loved ones, even in the midst of a relationship that had grown increasingly dangerous. Her story is a stark reminder of the dangers that can exist behind closed doors, even when victims take every possible step to protect themselves. The protective orders, the police calls, the court cases, they were all meant to create safety. Yet, for Shakia, those measures were not enough. Her death is a tragic illustration of how quickly intimate partner violence can escalate and how fragile legal protections can be when enforcement falls short. As we reflect on her life, it's important to remember the human being behind the tragedy. She was a mother who deserved more time with her child, a young woman whose life was stolen far too soon. And while the details of her death are harrowing, the lessons she leaves behind are critical. They are a call to action, for communities to take threats seriously, for authorities to ensure protections are enforced, and for everyone to remain vigilant when someone they care about is in danger. If Shakia's story resonates with you, share it. Talk about it. Let her life and the warnings it carries be seen and remembered. Subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories to follow cases like hers, because every case deserves to be followed and every victim deserves to be remembered. Her memory is not only a call for justice, it is a call to action, a reminder that awareness, intervention, and persistence can save lives before tragedy strikes.